All right. Welcome, everyone. As you can see, I have a different background this week because I am live streaming from work. We had math night. So instead of trying to, leave early and rush to do class, I just figured I'll have my own online class here. So you guys can see a little bit of what I do for my day job or where I work for my day job. Mm-hmm. Now, because I am at work, one or two people may walk in. The building is pretty empty, but if someone does walk in, just don't be alarmed. It's probably one of our custodians. Okay, as more people come in, I'm just gonna kind of start with some housekeeping. Excuse me. So I want to say that everybody so far is progressing really well in the class. I think almost everybody has at least gone through and still done some of the OLC tech stuff. So it's now week 3. You should definitely be done with that. And, you should kind of now be into week 1. I do recognize that some people are still getting their books. That's fine. Remember, everything is open to you up until the midterm. So, if your book is coming this week, next week, you'll still be good. If you're still waiting for your book to that 3rd week of February, at that point, you might either want to go to the library, because I believe this book can be found at the library. So you may want to check it out, or you may want to partner up with someone so you can still get the work done. Because if you try to do the quizzes without the book, you probably won't be successful, because I pull the questions directly from the book. So again, I understand that some people are still getting their books, but if you don't have your book by, I would say, the 3rd week in February, you might want to look at some other options, because you don't want to get too far behind, and you also don't want to turn in, poor quality on the quizzes, because the quizzes do count for a lot. All right. Let's see. Is there anything else? Oh, okay. So quizzes. So I think by now a couple of you have gone through your chapter 1 quiz. You've gone through not too many people for chapter 2, so I'll just kind of stick to chapter 1. So on all of my quizzes, I have a mixture of questions. So I'm going to have some multiple choice. I'm going to have some fill in the blank. I'm going to have some matching. I'm going to have some short answer. I really try to be diverse in the type of questions that I put on the quizzes. Now, with that being said, I do recognize that sometimes if you have a spelling error, because the thing with Canvas, if you don't spell it exactly how it's spelled as the answer, it's gonna mark you wrong. However, please know that I always have to go in and regrade, because I always include a short answer. So usually when I go in to grade your short answer questions, that's when I also go in to look at to see if you got something right, but then the system marked you wrong because you were off on the misspelling, or it was plural and you wrote it as singular, whatever. So the reason why I'm bringing that up is because I had a student who emailed me, and I forgot to kind of let you guys know at the in my earlier classes. So if you first take your quiz and you get your initial score and it marks you wrong because you misspelled something, you do not have to email me. I always go in and check anyway. Now, if you've noticed that it's been a week or two and you notice that I've graded your short answer, but the other question is still wrong, then email me, because at that point I was either grading too fast or I missed it. So at that point, yes, do go ahead and email me. But you don't have to email me when Canvas, says that you got something right and or something wrong and you got it right. I always go back in and double check anyway, because I have to grade your short answer responses on your quizzes. Okay, so it's 6:50. I think enough people are in here. I'm going to go ahead and get started. I will start by kind of going over some important information from the chapter. I believe with YouTube Live, when I switch screens, my screen goes black, but you should still hear me. So don't be alarmed. And I'm going to go ahead and get started. Let me upload the study guide link so you guys can kind of click through that with me. Okay. That is the study guide, and I am going to just kind of talk through it. Okay, so chapter 2, now that, we kind of got the major theorists out of the way in chapter 1, now chapter 2, Mamba mentality, shout outs Kobe. I'm born and raised in Los Angeles, so this is tough for me. I grew up watching Kobe. Even though I was always a Shaq fan, Kobe was a part of it. So this is really, it's kind of, it's just odd. Like, I'm not overly sad, but it is just kind of like we live in a world now where there is no Kobe Bryant. And so now every time I think about, me being a huge Laker fan in the late 90s, now it's also, wow, Kobe Bryant is no longer with us. So Mama mentality, that's my mantra for the rest of the year. Okay, so chapter 2 opens up with, it's basically going to talk about, your heredity versus environment, because that was a very, that was a big thing back in those times when we're talking about, scientific discovery. So it was all about, nature versus nurture. Are we more influenced by our genes, hereditary, or are we more influenced by the environment? So with this chapter, there are some important things that I want us to notate. And you're really going to focus on 2 sections in the chapter. So the first section that you're going to focus on is called environmental influences and contexts. And then the second piece is environment in a broader context, family and culture. Now, the reason why I wanted us to focus more on the environment aspect rather than the hereditary aspect is because most of the professions that we're going into, like I saw, most of us are educators. A lot of times when we're dealing with children, we don't know their hereditary, anyway. We don't know much about their genetics. The only thing that we can provide is their environment. And so that's one of the reasons why I really wanted us to focus on that aspect of environment, because environment that's something that, while you may or may not be able to change, you can at least understand it better, especially when you kind of think about your kids. And I mean, your potential, your future students. And you just kind of have to think about, all right, well, what environment do they come from? How does their environment play a role in how they interact when they come to school, which is a totally different environment. Okay, so some important terms. So the first term is, I want us to be very familiar with habituation. And what does that mean? And when I say what does that mean, I mean in terms of the textbook definition, what is that, what is habituation? So that's a very important term that I want us to go over. Then you're also, now we talked about classical and operant conditioning in chapter 1. So now they've brought it back under the guise of an environmental influence. So if you are, if you come from an environment where your reward system is very tangible and very concrete, that, that has an impact on, how you learn, that has an impact on how you interact with others. That has an impact on how are you motivated. So those are very important terms that I definitely want us to be familiar with. And on the study guide, I kind of give you like some quick definitions, but you definitely want to go in deep and really read that part of the chapter where it talks about what these 3 terms means. And on the study guide, I list pages 49. But if you don't have the second edition, it may be off. So just focus on the title of the section, which is going to be environmental influences and contexts. Then the next piece, environment in a broader context, family and culture, that should start around page 52. And so within that, there's a really great chapter, section, that focuses on multi-ethnic and homogenous cultures. So when we think about multi-ethnic, we think of a place akin to America, in which they call the melting pot, which I disagree with that term completely, because America isn't a melting pot. Because when you come to America, you don't mesh into this one thing that is, American. When families and cultures come to America, they bring that culture with them, and it doesn't necessarily get melted all together. It's still tangible. So that's why I don't necessarily like the term the melting pot, because your culture is something that is very important to you, and you shouldn't necessarily have to, shun that culture just because you move to a different place. It's more of a kind of marriage between the 2 cultures where, okay, this is how we did it over there. I'm in America now. What are some pieces that I can easily easily bring over? So that's one thing, versus homogenous cultures. So if we think about America as a country is very diverse, when we think about our communities in which we grew up in, a lot of times our communities are very homogenous. So case in point, earlier I just talked about how I grew up in LA. I grew up in South Central LA, and it was very homogenous, pretty much Black. So when I went to elementary school, everybody was Black. All of my teachers were Black. If I did have a mix, I may have one or two Latinx students, but for the most part, it was very homogenous. By the time that I got to middle school, it's a little bit larger. You don't have as many middle schools. So you have a lot of homogenous elementary schools that may feed into one main middle school. And so my middle school, while it was a little bit more diverse, it was still predominantly Black. I really didn't see a whole lot of diversity until I got to high school, in which at that point, my high school was predominantly Latinx, but I still, there were still a lot of Black kids. That was my first time where I went to school with Asian students. That was the first time where I went to school with students. We had a large population of Eastern European students. So, I learned about Ukraine, I learned about Russia, I learned about Latvia, I learned about all of those different places on the map that I knew was there, but I didn't really know about. So that's almost how you can have homogenous cultures within a multi-ethnic, overarching culture. And so what the chapter does, or what this section of the chapter does, is it really talks about, well, what is it like, growing up in a homogenous culture versus a multi-ethnic culture? Is it easier, or do you perceive it to be easier? And, if you can even say it's easier, because what does that mean? So that's a really great section. I do have some questions over there. I think I have a short answer question that comes from that section of the chapter. So you definitely want to be well versed in it, and you definitely want to be well versed in the terms. And then lastly, as it pertains to this section, is development across lifespan. So we are influenced by, our environment. We are influenced by our genes, but then we're also influenced by history. And so when you really think about it, a lot of times who you are as an adult, it's because of different things that happen to you at critical moments in your life. And it's almost like you hit that moment and then it switched your trajectory. And then you hit another moment and then that switched your trajectory. And so that kind of leads us into our assignment titled, Why Am I This Way? And so with this particular assignment, it is dependent upon you being very comfortable with these 4 terms. So the terms are normative age graded, normative history graded, non-normative, and then they have some other mediating factors. And so mediating factors, that includes your gender, that includes your ethnicity, and different things like that. Okay, so if you are following along with me on the study guide, you should be at this last page where I kind of describe the assignment of why am I this way? So first, you're going to create a bubble map. And basically, the bubble map is illustrating your knowledge of the terms and if you can determine which events go where. So part of your grade is making sure that you come up with the right memories and apply them where they need to go. So for my study guide, so first, the first thing I want you to list is your culture and your ethnicity/race. Now, in previous classes, the culture and the ethnicity always gets kind of gray area. So a lot of times when I ask about culture, students will integrate their religion, which is fine. At first, when I first had this assignment, I kind of told students, well, no, I don't want to know what religion you ascribe to. I want to know, your main culture. But I do understand that when we talk about America and when we talk about a lot of diverse people that come from places from all over the world, sometimes your religion is strongly ingrained into your culture. So if you want to list your religion, if you want to list your religion as your culture, because growing up in your household, it was very much a part of your culture, that's totally fine. The next piece where it asks for your ethnicity/race, for that one, I'm looking for terms like, I'm Hispanic or I'm Latinx, I'm Black, I'm white. A lot of times I run it to with the most with my students that are white, because I don't know if maybe they feel uncomfortable with saying that they are white. But for this assignment, if I'm asking your ethnicity or your race, definitely include, you can say I'm white, or if you're Italian American, or if you're Russian American or something like that. But definitely don't be afraid to list your race, because I want everyone to feel comfortable, listing what their race is, because that has an impact on who we are as people. So that's going to be one bubble. Now, the next thing is going to be your gender. And so when you talk about your gender, don't just simply say, oh, I'm a man, or, oh, I'm a woman. Really talk about, how did your gender impact, how you grew up. So sometimes I've had students that, they'll say things like, oh, growing up a girl in a family full of boys, I was very, I was tough. They kind of, I grew up with a tough demeanor. I grew up fighting. I grew up playing. Or, you could say something like, being a girl in a family full of boys, I grew up very pampered, or, I grew up very sheltered, or something. So for those 2 bubbles, don't necessarily just list kind of say, well, how did this impact me, growing up? And so for my example, like I say, growing up Black in Los Angeles, and then I didn't stop there. I kept going. I talked about, well, what was it like for me growing up Black in LA? And then at that bubble underneath it, I said that I was a girl, but then I also say, in a family that was largely composed of women, I was always raised to be strong. We're all loud, and we never felt, it was never stressed to us that, oh, your role is to make sure that you get married and get a husband and raise a family and things like that. That's just not, and mainly because, I grew up with a lot of women and everybody was divorced. So no one really prioritized getting married anyway, because everybody got married and then got divorced. So, but that's why I am the way that I am. So next, I ask you to include a normative age-graded influence. Now, a normative age-graded influence is something that happens to people around the same age. So like most people start school around, 5, 6. Most people go through puberty in that kind of, preteen, teenager. Most people graduate high school around. So that's what they mean by normative age-graded influence. It's just kind of like, what makes you similar to other people in your age range? What did you go through that was similar, but it was a little twist? So case in point, everybody goes through puberty, but everybody doesn't go through puberty the same way. Some people, when you go through puberty, it's a welcomed thing. Some people, when you go through puberty, it's not too welcome. You're scared, you're afraid, you don't know what's going on. So that's what I kind of want to get into. And so for my example, I talk about how I was not very developed. And I talk about how, because I was not developed, that made it very easily for me to have a lot of guy friends because, I was pretty much flat chested, didn't have wide hips. They didn't really look at me in a sexual way. So a lot of the teasing that some of my more developed friends had to endure, I was left out of. And they just kind of saw me as, oh, you're the cool homegirl, because I was a tomboy. And so, but that, again, that was my experience. I want to know what you all's experiences were. So then the next term is the normative history graded influence. So this is what prominent historical event did you live through? And then how did that event impact you? So for me, growing up in LA, I keep saying I grew up in LA. I think by now you guys know where I grew up. So I'm gonna stop saying that. But for me, I listed multiple age graded influences. So case in point, I was definitely influenced by the crack epidemic. Even if I didn't know that I was, my community was, my environment was. And so I think that definitely had an impact on myself and definitely how I view law enforcement, because at that time in the 90s, LAPD, everybody knew LAPD was worldwide known, and they weren't necessarily known for good things. And so it was almost like we grew up knowing not to trust the police. Like we grew up knowing that. And that's something hard to shake. And so then the next piece that I said I was influenced by were the 1992 riots. I know apparently now we're supposed to call it an uprising, but I call it a riot. So the 1992 riots, that definitely had a profound impact on me. And just in how I learned very early on that it's kind of hard to put, but I learned at a very early age that even if video says one thing, if police officers say another thing, what they say matters. And again, that had a very profound impact on not only me, but, my entire community. And that was something that it shook a lot of people, to the core. Now I was little, so I mainly kind of saw how adults reacted. And then lastly, I put the 2008 economic recession, which happened exactly as I was coming out of college. So, I was 19. And so at that point, on one hand, we were kind of sheltered from the recession, but then it also limited us from starting some of those milestones that people usually start, because we were starting out in a poor economy. And so that had an impact on, different things that you were able to do or not able to do. And so that's normative history graded. So again, normative history means what is a prominent historical event that you lived through, and then you can kind of talk about how did it impact you. If you list more than one, you don't necessarily have to talk about how it impacted you. But if you only listed one, I definitely want to know, why did you only list that one? It's probably because it was really important. So go ahead and give me a little bit of meat. Give me some more detail. Okay. And then your last one is going to be a non-normative influence. So this is just kind of like, what's something that happened to you that was very important to you, but didn't necessarily happen to everybody else. So they give examples of moving, if you had a death, if you went through a divorce, just kind of different things like that. So for my non-normative, I use the example of when I moved to Texas, which was huge for me because I went from West Coast and then I moved to the East Coast, which everybody is rude. Everybody is rude. DC was super rude. Kids would cuss at me. Everybody was rude. And so then I moved to Texas, and you always hear about Southern hospitality, but I moved here and I was like, oh, wow, this is a real thing. And so that was a huge culture shock for me because everybody else is pleasant. So then it was kind of like, okay, well, now you need to be more pleasant. So using terms like ma'am, using terms like sir. When I walk my dog, people that live around the neighborhood wave and I don't know them. And that still gives me pause because I'm like, I don't know you. Why are you waving at me? But, I still wave back because when in Rome, you say New Yorkers are the worst. I don't know. People from DC they're pretty rude. So we might have to do a rude off between DC and New York. I think they did I feel like there was an article of sorts that talks about like what are the most rude cities to live in or something. And I know they gotta be up there because man, DC was, tried by fire. If you could live in DC, you could make it anywhere. And so all of that shapes who you see in front of you today. Though, those are kind of, my things that I chose. And that's why I am today. So for your assignment, just to kind of go over some logistics. Yes, it does need to be a bubble map. Now, on my example, I don't include the headings, but I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to re-upload this so that I do have the headings. So for your bubbles, please label which one is which. So like your bubble that's for gender, label it gender. Your bubble that's for your culture, ethnicity, and race, label it as such. Your normative age graded, label it. Label everything. Again, I know in my example, I don't have things labeled, but I do want you guys to label your bubbles. Lastly, when you upload it into Canvas, upload it as a PDF. If you upload it as a Word document, it's going to you say Philly is up there. All right. I know one person from Philly, and I promise you, he's the nicest guy I've ever met. So maybe he's an anomaly. But you want to save it as a PDF and upload it that way. I've had a lot of issues from students that when they save it as a Word doc and then try to upload it, because it will shift the bubbles and sometimes the document gets cut off. So I will need to read. Yes, please go ahead and resubmit it and label the bubbles. And also, if you would prefer to do it by hand and just take a picture and upload it, you can totally do it that way. Really always work best other than uploading it as a Word document. It's kind of hit or miss, and it's usually a miss. Okay. Are there any questions about the assignment? And also, if you get confused on the terms and you don't like the way that the book explained it, these are very, very popular terms. So you can look these up on Google and it may give you, kind of better clarification of some examples of normative, age graded, normative, history graded, and non-normative. So definitely don't feel limited by the book on these concepts because these are very prominent concepts. And there's tons of additional literature out there on the World Wide Web. Okay, I don't have any questions, so I'm going to move on. And now we're just going to kind of walk through the module for week 3. Okay, so for week 3, you're in heredity and environment. Your learning materials are, so I have one video that talks about color blindness. The reason why I included this video is because there is a section in your chapter that talks about race. And while I don't have any questions on race, I think I may have one or two. I mainly explore race as a social construct, because we know that scientists pretty much disproved race kind of like a long time ago. Like there's no real differences between the races. Any differences that we have now are just kind of like inherent and perceived. And they're more kind of like differences on an environmental or a social aspect. But, the study of eugenics, where in the 1800s, they used to say that, there were differences in brain sizes and there were differences in how you could get sick and there were differences in blah, blah, blah. All that racist science got thrown out of the window. And now all scientists pretty much believe that, no, race is not an actual thing. Honestly, it was something that was created to create a hierarchy between the races to perpetuate racism. So that's why the videos that I included really kind of just dispel a lot of those myths that kind of create gaps. And it's really all about learning and understanding. And that's why I said I don't like the term the melting pot, because you are who you are, and who you are is valued, and who you are is valid. And you shouldn't have to assimilate, and you shouldn't have to change that. So this video challenges the idea of being colorblind, because if you think about it, if you're saying that you're colorblind, that means you're ignoring a lot about a person that may or may not be important to them, because my ethnicity is very important to me. So if you're telling me that you're colorblind, you're basically telling me that in my ethnicity, my experiences within my ethnicity don't matter to you. And I can't go for that. So that's a really great video. The next video talks about temperament, hereditary, and genes. This was a really cool video. It talks like when we talk about baby temperaments. And so then another video I've included, it talks about nature or nurture. And that's also a really great video. And then lastly, what race do you think you are and why? Is race genetic or a socially construct? So these are all the different videos. And then your discussion board post this week deals with the human race. I'm sorry. So I have a specific concept. I have a specific quote that I pulled from the book. And, I want you to, I just want you to kind of put, what are your thoughts in regards to that quote? And yeah, so, with discussion posts, I don't really grade if you agree with me or not. I really just grade for, did you really put in the time and the effort to give me a well thought out response? Okay, what about the length? How long do you want each bubble? I don't like to say how much I want. I want you to really think deeply and carefully and, explain, why are you this way? I'm pretty sure you wouldn't be able to explain it in in 2 words. But then I also know you don't necessarily need to write a 500-word essay. So just kind of, just give me some meat, give me some details so I can walk away and I can read it and I get an understanding of why that event or why that is important to you. But rarely do I include things about length because I'm more about quality than quantity. Because you can give me a really strong sentence and that's it. And that's it. Some people they need more than just one sentence. So I'll kind of leave it at that. But please know you can't just put a word or two. Like we all know that. And that's pretty much it. That culminates class. I think I've covered all the major hot spots. Next class is going to be very important because we will talk about the infancy project. So phone a friend, text a friend, tap a friend, let them know that next week, if they can't make the class live on Tuesday, they want to go in and watch it immediately the next day because I'm going to go into detail about that infancy project and all of the expectations and requirements. If you don't have any questions, you are free to go. If you do have questions, you can hang back. You can type them into the chat box and I will answer them as I go along. This video will be uploaded to Canvas later on tonight, probably like within an hour or so once I get home. And I'll just kind of add it to I'll add it to the module. I don't see the discussion for this week under discussions. Okay, let me go in. This is a great discussion. All right. Okay. Okay, you should see it. Because it is published, it is on. Is anyone else having that issue where they can't see it? Okay. Yeah, it's called The Human Race. I think maybe why you can't see it is because you have to go through the module. Really, the best way to go through this course is I know on Canvas you can kind of click to see what are all the quizzes, what are all the discussions, it would be best to go through it by module because some things are going to be locked to you if you didn't do the prerequisite for it. And the prerequisite means every single page in the module. So don't skip the first page where it goes over the objectives. Don't skip the learning materials. Like you have to go through every single page in sequential order. And the reason why I do that is because if you go through in sequential order, it will make sense. But if you kind of popcorn and try to do the quiz or just try to do the discussion, you're going to have questions. Okay. If there are no more questions, I am going to end the stream. If you think of something in like the next 5 or 10 minutes, you can just go ahead and email me. And if it's a really great question, I'll reply all so that the class can benefit from the question and the following response. But I do appreciate everyone coming out. Every week I get more people. So I think this was the most I had. I had 30 participants at one time. Very good. Please feel free to subscribe to this YouTube page. I am an educator. This is my profession. This is what I do. So I keep telling myself I want to do more like professional development type things on here. In the module, it says Chapter 2 quizzes due Friday, January 25th. Does it? Chapter 2 quiz, I'm looking at it, has a date of February 2nd. It's this Friday. Yes, the Chapter 2 quiz is due on the 2nd. All things are Patty, all my things will be due on a Sunday. So everything's always due on a Sunday. I never have things due on Friday. Everything's always due on a Sunday. Most things, I don't want to say never because sure enough, but the Chapter 2 quiz, it says February 2nd. I'm not sure why you're saying January 25th. And I explained with the peer review that Canvas doesn't alert the peer review until after the due date. So you do need to be mindful to go back in and check when you're assigned a peer review. And, you know, you kind of want to check it the day after it's due. But honestly, I think you're doing it the right way because I'm pretty sure I've already graded some of your discussion board posts. So if you have done a discussion board and you received 10 points, whatever it is you're doing it the right way. It was in the module under overview. I'm not sure. Are you in the right class? And also, are you in the right? So if you've had me before, double check to make sure that you're looking at this semester and not a previous semester. That may be what it is. Because I think Canvas, like your courses never go away. They're always still kind of there. You have to hide them yourself. But I do know for a fact that Chapter 2 quiz is due February 2nd. I just double checked. Because it's due this Sunday. Or this upcoming Sunday. Another thing, I have all of my due dates on the calendar feature. So if you go to your calendar in Canvas for my class, you probably can print it out. I think you can print it out and you can kind of print it out and give yourself like a month at a glance, because I definitely took the time to enter every single due date into the calendar. So you should be able to see when things are due or coming up. Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. I'm going to shut down. I think I answered the last questions and I'm really hungry. But like I said, if a question comes up, don't hesitate to email me. All right. Everyone have a good night. I am now ending the stream.